is the nation's foremost authority on Dr. Howard Thurman. Professor Fluker was born on August 26, 1951 in Baden, Mississippi, to Zeddy Lou Pickens and Clinton Fluker. He served as a U.S. Army as a chaplain assistant from 1971 to 1973, received his BA in philosophy and biblical studies from Trinity College in 1977, and his MDiv degree in 1980 from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary. Dr. Fluker completed his PhD in social ethics and at Boston University in 1988. From 1981 to 1986, Dr. Fluker served as pastor of St. John's Congregational Church in Massachusetts, became university chaplain and assistant professor of religion at Dillard University in 1986. He then became assistant professor of Christian ethics at Vanderbilt Divinity School and assistant pastor at First Baptist Church. In 1991, Dr. Fluker was named the Dean of Black Church Studies and Martin Luther King Jr.'s Memorial Professor of Theology and Black Church Studies at Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School. In 1992, Dr. Fluker became the editor of the Howard Thurman Papers Project. He served as director of the National Resource Center for the Development of Ethical Leadership from the Black Church Tradition at CRCD in 1993. In 1998, Dr. Fluker joined Morehouse College as executive director of the Leadership Center, renamed the Andrew Young Center for Global Leadership, the Coca-Cola Professor of Leadership Studies and Professor of Philosophy and Religion. As I begin my career in national talk radio, I could think of no one better than to help ground our conversation in solid theological thinking, the theological thinking that has guided our ancestors, that guided the civil rights movement. And only person that I know who understands this subject as profoundly as Dr. Thurman himself is the one person on the planet who has studied Dr. Howard Thurman. Mythology has it that Martin Luther King Jr. kept a copy of Dr. Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited, with him at all times. My father, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, kept a copy of the book, Jesus and the Disinherited, with him throughout his ministry. Dr. Walter Fluker is my guest in this hour. Dr. Fluker, welcome to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
I'm absolutely delighted to be with you, Jesse.
Dr. Fluker, who is Howard Thurman?
Many people know the name, but are not aware that he was one of the towering intellectuals of the 20th century, not just this extraordinary preacher and spiritual leader and mystic, but an incredibly powerful intellectual who literally thought himself out of the throes of poverty at the turn of the 20th century, facing post-Reconstruction realities for African Americans, and went on to graduate from the first African American to graduate from the 8th grade in Daytona, Florida. Later on to Morehouse, and after Morehouse, Rochester Theological Seminary, and holding posts at his alma mater, Morehouse, and going on to Howard University, where he really, at that point in his career, meets the world. He led the first delegation to meet with Mahatma Gandhi in 1935 through 1936, returned to Howard University, where his office mate was Benjamin Elijah Mays. And the president of Howard University was the indomitable Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, and history builds, at least in my scholarship, around these deep, dense, tight networks. Thurman later leaves Howard University to found the first co-pastored initially church for interracial justice, but also interfaith, which is a key component of his contribution, I think, to America and the world. It was called the Fellowship Church for All Peoples. He pastored from 1943 through 1952, really. We normally just say 43 to 53. He goes on to Boston University and becomes the Dean of Marsh Chapel, the first African American to be appointed as a dean in a majority white mainline university. He pastored the Marsh Chapel and served also as director of spiritual resources and taught courses within the School of Theology. And after that, he founded the Educational Trust in his name. That's where I met him, and that's where many of the young spirits, indeed your father, spent times drawing on the wisdom, the simmering wisdom, and the thoughtful praxis of Howard Washington Thurman.
When we come forward, we are going to take a deep dive with Dr. Walter Fluker into the life of Howard Thurman and the significance of his contribution for our struggle for such a time as this. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come back forward, we'll be with Dr. Walter Fluker.
Schedule your appointment today at vaxassist.com.
Sponsored by Pfizer.
We're not for everybody, but we're for everybody. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr., and welcome back to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Our very special guest is Dr. Walter Fluker. Dr. Fluker, this is the longest segment in our show. Share with us the significance of Howard Thurman's theology, his work, the inward see, the inward journey, and social responsibility.
Thank you very much for asking that question in particular. The significance of Thurman's thinking, for me, can be discussed in three very important ways. And I'm thinking particularly for this time when a new climate of fear and deception and hatred is seeping into the consciousness of people, and I think causing despair. One is for Thurman, spirituality, the inward journey, and social transformation are one fluid sentence.
Mm.
Many see Thurman and other spiritual thinkers as detached mystics who are otherworldly with no concern for social and democratic processes. But Thurman was a very astute interpreter of democratic dogma and doctrine. Spirituality for Thurman allowed the individual to enter what we like to call the inner sea. That's his language. But it's really the interiority of religious experience. We spend a lot of time in churches and in mosques and many other places, thinking of our religious principles, the dogma doctrines, but Thurman is far more interested in religious experience. And he says that in the religious experience or the creative encounter, one encounters a presence, a liberating presence, which frees the human spirit in such a way that it actually propels the individual into the social arena, because one cannot find release from the things that constrain and hold back his or her own wholeness just by working on it in the confines of the interior. Because the things that keep us in bondage to fear, to oppression, to subjugated consciousness also exist in social, political, and economic arrangements. And so, in order to really be a free spirit, I must work for social justice within the context of religion, politics, and the other kinds of things that draw us into a political world.
Howard Thurman referred to these as hellhounds:
Mhm.
fear, deception, hatred. Share with us why he chose the analogy of hounds.
So in 1949, he writes this incredible little book called Jesus and the Disinherited. If you've not read it, you're really not educated. Everybody needs to read, like your dad says often, Jesus and the Disinherited. See how subtle Thurman is? He calls them hounds of hell. He's really pointing to the past of slavery, where renegades, maroons, were on the run, escaping. And when he tried to first publish this book, he wanted to publish it as The Hounds of Hell. That's the title he wanted. Instead, it was rejected. He later published it under the title Jesus and the Disinherited. But hounds for Thurman represent the deep, surreptitious ways in which we are psychologically and politically bound to fear. I can't say enough because of the time we have today, but at this point, in the lived experiences of citizens in this nation, fear is creeping in like an insidious fog. And Thurman saw fear as a straitjacket that prevents one from being able to maintain a sense of wholeness at one's core. Because one cannot fight the struggles of justice if inside one is scattered and not whole. This is the basic idea. So, overcoming fear, he suggests, leads us to the big question of deception, because people who are afraid deceive not only their oppressors, but they deceive sometimes those closest to them, and often they don't tell the truth, Jesse, to themselves.
Mm.
And Thurman does a masterful job, not just psychologically, but culturally, in thinking about the ways in which the practice of deception or lying actually destroys the interior and prevents our encounter with forces of injustice that hold us in bondage. In fact, when I speak the truth to myself, to you, and to power, I equalize my relationship between the oppressor and myself. Because as long as I speak the truth, Thurman thinks, even at the risk of death, the world can't do me no harm. That's what we say in the black church. The world can't do me no harm. Because I have equalized my relationship, which takes me to a place where I can encounter the venomous hatred that is being spewed out in many ways, especially on this day that we all remember just 4 years ago when a would-be king and his legions took on the Capitol building. Hate, Thurman thinks, will actually at some point turn on itself because hate cannot survive without life. And therefore, I'll make this quick. The only remedy, he thinks, for hatred is the power of love. And love for Thurman is not the sentimental affection that one has for his pet or even for one's lover or spouse. Love for Thurman is the most powerful force in the world because love has its basis and foundation in the creator of life. And if I am loving in the pursuit of justice, then I stand in a seat of power, even at the risk of my own death. I stand in a seat of power which unleashes freedom into the world. And this speaks, of course, to his deep appreciation for Gandhi and others who were in that orbit.
Dr. Fluker, before Howard Thurman in Jesus and the Disinherited unleashes upon us these hellhounds, fear, deception, hatred, and then concludes with the idea, not an anemic love, but the idea of love as a way out and as something that conquers all, he offers amazingly an interpretation of Jesus and a location of Jesus against the backdrop of 2,000 years of corruption. It's as if Dr. Thurman mystically finds himself in the first century and offers an insight in who Jesus of Nazareth was that I think is important to our spirits and our theology in light of what you're saying is likely to come.
I'm so glad you're going to have Professor Aubrey Hendricks in your lineup for this season. Thurman provides what he calls an interpretation. And it surprises many to discover that for Thurman, Jesus is not God. Jesus is a human being who did precisely what we were talking about earlier, went so deeply into his own consciousness that he woke up in the world and understood his calling as the Son of God. Wouldn't it be an incredible thing if we might, in our own way and at this time, find channels so deep within ourselves that we bump into the divine, and the divine calls us into ourselves as transformers of worlds? I think it's possible, says Thurman. And this interpretation of Jesus is very significant. Mind you, he says Jesus was a Jew. He was a Palestinian Jew. Whoa. And
Yeah.
what could that mean? That if he were kicked into a ditch by a Roman soldier, he'd be just another Jew in a ditch. But this Jesus embraced truth and love to such a degree, fearlessly speaking truth to power to his own people and to the Roman Empire. Of course, Thurman says anybody who dares speak truth to power and dares to love in the way Jesus loved, they will die to death on a cross, whether that's literally or figuratively. The idea is one has to risk death in order to embrace freedom. Freedom lies coiled up in the heart of death, as death lies coiled up in the heart of freedom. That's not Thurman, that's Jean-Paul Sartre. But the point is that one cannot authentically engage the world if one is afraid. And Thurman knew this. He saw his people under the categorizing fear of segregation, of white supremacy, with a long heritage of enslavement. And he knew that the only thing that could move his people to another place was to first overcome fear. Just like Jesus, he says, overcame fear. And not lie to his oppressor to save his skin, but to stand toe to toe and call the oppressor by his name. Wow.
I
Jesse,
find that
I don't know if you can do it any better than
I find that fascinating, because in that inward space, in that re-reflection and reinterpretation of Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr. and others find strength. Share with us the strength they gained from Dr. Thurman in that interpretation.
Thurman was a counselor. He saw himself as a pastoral counselor. He didn't get out on the front line. He's often been criticized for that. I'm grateful for leaders like Otis Moss, your dad, and so many others who found their way to Howard Thurman, just like a Nicodemus found their way to Jesus by night. And they laid out their souls to him, their questions, and they found a place, this is Thurman's language, where they could say, I choose. I choose. Martin King was no exception. He's one of many of those who found their way to Thurman. The most dramatic illustration of this is at the 1958 stabbing, and King is in the Harlem hospital, and he's suffering, and Thurman makes a visit to King, and he says to King, you are part of a vast organic movement which you don't completely understand. And at this point in your life, unless you deepen your channels, this movement itself will swallow you up. And he encouraged King to take 2 weeks extra of convalescence and devote himself to contemplation and prayer. I think it's fascinating. All of King's biographers basically say King expanded his convalescence, and after he returned home in February of the following year, he makes a journey to the land of India and returns, of course, as this activist whom we know to be an advocate of nonviolent resistance.
One of the reasons I wanted Dr. Fluker to begin our programming on this particular network, on KBLA, is because we're going to have to take a deep inward journey to overcome fear, to overcome our self-deception and the deception that we're going to hear. And we're going to have to come to terms with the hatred that exists in our society and the hatred that we have for ourselves, even within our own community, and conclude, as Dr. Howard Thurman did, on the idea of love. But at the very beginning of that is a new interpretation for Dr. Thurman, a deep inward journey and reflection on who Jesus of Nazareth was. And therefore, Dr. Walter Fluker at this hour is one of our foremost thinkers on what's coming next. When we come forward, we return with Dr. Walter Fluker.
A safe place to go loud. A great place for progressive politics. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Amber Payton with 4 Things You Should Know from BIN News. President-elect Trump is asking to delay his January 10th sentencing in his New York hush money case. Convicted in May on 34 counts of falsifying records, Trump argues a Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity should overturn his eviction. Black Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott has declared a state of emergency due to severe winter weather. The order activates the city's emergency operations plan to deploy resources. Effective from 11 p.m. Sunday, it lasts 48 hours with potential for renewal. Former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley, running for DNC chair, has gained endorsements from current and former Black members of Congress. They highlight his leadership and commitment to diversifying the party. And April Baskin, a Buffalo native and former Erie County legislature chair, has been sworn in as the first Black woman to represent Western New York in the state Senate. Serving the 63rd District, Baskin aims to improve housing, education, and resources for first responders. I'm Amber Payton on the Black Information Network, your home for Black News First.
If your supply chain demands a flexible workforce, hire with Express Employment Professionals. With contract and full-time workers from Express Employment, you get the staff you need and manage contingent labor costs. Learn more at expresspros.com. That's expresspros.com.
Lowe's knows how to save you time and money. Order what you need by 2 p.m. to get it delivered same day. Valid on eligible in-stock orders and select zip codes for same-day delivery. Subject to driver availability. Fees vary based on purchase. More terms apply. See Lowe's.com/same-day delivery for details.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Rams and Chargers are feeling grateful about their first-round playoff matchups. Both teams could have been facing much tougher opponents if things had turned out different on Sunday. The Rams will play Minnesota next Monday instead of Detroit, which beat Minnesota Sunday night to clinch the number 1 seed in the NFC. Even as a number 5 seed, Detroit would have been a lot to handle for the Rams. The Chargers win in Las Vegas Sunday might have been their most important win of the season. The win allowed the Chargers to avoid a first-round game at Baltimore against MVP favorite Lamar Jackson, running back Derrick Henry, and the Ravens' Rough Rider defense. The Chargers will play at Houston Saturday. Houston was 4-5 in the second half of the season. The NFL now has only 5 Black head coaches. Gerard Mayo was fired Sunday by New England after 1 season. New England finished 4-13. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, a.k.a. the Voice of Reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging relationship discussions you'll hear anywhere. So make it a point to rendezvous with me, Zoe Williams, the Voice of Reason, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, your relationships will never be the same. The VOR is on fire tonight.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
If you're living with dry age-related macular degeneration or dry AMD, you may be at risk for developing geographic atrophy or GA. GA can be unpredictable and progress rapidly, leading to irreversible vision loss. Now there's something you can do to
slow it down, get it going slower.
Izervay is proven to slow GA progression.
Izervay gets GA going slower.
Izervay or avacincaptad pagel is a prescription eye injection used to treat GA. Don't take it if you have an infection or active swelling in or around your eye. Izervay can cause eye infection, retinal detachment, or increased risk of wet AMD. Izervay may temporarily increase eye pressure. Your vision may be impaired after an eye injection or exam. Don't delay. Ask your doctor about Izervay today.
Izervay gets GA going slower.
Visit Izervay.com. That's IZERVAY.com.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where everybody is somebody and nobody is a stranger. You belong here.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome back to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My guest is Dr. Walter Fluker, the world's foremost authority on Dr. Howard Thurman. Dr. Fluker has consulted with the Democratic Leadership Council, Goldman Sachs, Global Leaders Programs, the Department of Education, the Department of State, and the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. In 2004, Dr. Fluker joined the editorial board of the American Association of Colleges and Universities publication Liberal Education. In 2006, he served on Boston University School of Theology's Board of Overseers. Other boards that he has sat on includes the Atlanta Speech School, Trinity Press International, the Howard Thurman International and Educational Trust. He is a member of Sigma Pi Phi Fraternity, the Society for Christian Ethics, and the Society for the Study of Black Religion. Dr. Fluker's recent publications include the Papers of Howard Washington Thurman and a 2016 publication, The Ground Has Shifted. I want my engineer to put those Dr. Howard Thurman papers across our board now, because I want everyone to understand that there is serious scholarship and serious research and serious reflection in what Dr. Fluker is bringing forward for such a time as this, as we reflect upon the foundation of our spiritual engagement with this society in the upcoming era. Dr. Fluker, welcome back to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Thank you. I'm back.
Dr. Fluker, share with us some of the editors and the scholarship and the time that it has taken to dig deep into Howard Thurman.
We began this work in 1992 when I was Dean of Black Church Studies at Colgate Rochester Divinity School, one of the alma maters of Howard Thurman. And since then, I've had loads of editors, but there are some names that I do want to represent. One is Luther Smith, whom I think is the preeminent scholar, though you give me credit. I'm so glad that Luther exists. Peter Eisenstadt, who is the biographer for Thurman, Hounds of Hell, Sylvia Glick, my managing editor, Catherine Tomber, and so many others who've been part of this. This was a massive work. We worked with over 58,000 documents that we had to select over a 4-year period, our universe of text. And from that, cull maybe 7% of the entire corpus for publication. So please know this was a massive thinker who lived a very long life, and that when we speak about Thurman, we are really trying to climb a big mountain that goes high into the sky, and we're still at the very foot of the mountain. However, I'm glad that we have a chance to talk about Thurman's relevancy for this time. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Dr. Fluker, all of these works, by the way, are available on Amazon.com.
Correct.
Please Google Dr. Walter Fluker on Amazon.com, the works, the papers of Howard Thurman, and you will see just how broad this extraordinary research project is. Dr. Fluker, if I can go back to this question of locating Jesus, one of Dr. Thurman's foundational thoughts is that Jesus of Nazareth not only came into the world a Palestinian Jew, but he came into the world a brown Palestinian Jew, and he identified with the marginalized and the poor. And then Dr. Thurman suggested that in our particular context, we too are part of that identification. Your thoughts, Dr. Fluker?
Yeah, Thurman never gives Jesus a color, but it's implied. And his later scholarship that looks at some of the some even Asiatic roots of Jesus. But Thurman is more interested, Jesse, in getting to what he calls the anatomy of Jesus and his interpretation of especially certain practices that allow us to always be contemporary with Jesus. And I'd like to just share a few of those. There's a little book by Thurman called Disciplines of the Spirit where you bump into some of this. But the first thing for Thurman is that Jesus points us to the presence of God who is already within us. So I don't have to run up and down hills and streets, and very dangerously find existing structures to worship God. I can never lose God. He tells an endearing story of a young Indian roe, as they call it, male deer in India, who gets a scent in his nostrils in the early spring and it drives him mad. He goes running everywhere looking for the scent of the musk. It's springtime. He doesn't know that. And it's mating season, but he doesn't know that. He only smells the scent. And after a while, he falls exhausted. Thurman says, with his head on his tiny hooves, and he realizes that the scent was in his own hide. Go where you will, he says, but if you're going to find God, it won't be outside of you. The old dictum, know thyself, is where Thurman be. It's here that we encounter the presence of God. And encountering the presence of God, one discovers one's own integrity, one's own wholeness. One discovers one's freedom. That is, Jesse, the freedom not just to act, but the freedom that takes you beyond reacting to the other. This is a very clever way in which Thurman
say that one more time again.
I'm responsible not only for my freedom, but I'm responsible for my reaction to the other who bears weight on my freedom. Let me say it another way. He tells a story. Stories are better with Thurman. He says there was a little rattlesnake. He was chasing his sister. He was a bad boy in Florida, chasing his sister, not a rattlesnake, a small snake. And he put his foot on the snake to hold it so he could pick it up. And he said underneath his foot, he could feel the resistance, the throbbing vitality of the snake. And he said, though the snake could not exercise his option to be free, it still maintained a sense of its options. So at all times, he says, people who are oppressed, colonized, they may not have the option to exercise freedom at a certain point, but they must always maintain a sense of options. And this is what the presence does.
Dr. Fluker, I have just 2 minutes left in this segment, but I do want to ask you the question. In Jesus and the Disinherited, Howard Thurman talks about hatred being contagion.
Yes.
He talked about a conductor. Share that story with us. We just have 2 minutes before the break, and we'll come right back after we come forward to finish the stories.
Everything is contagious. All experiences are contagious. Hatred is contagious. It's like a virus that catches on fire, worse perhaps than some of the pandemics we've experienced. And when hatred completes its work, it becomes hell walking on earth, says. He says, but love is also contagious. And it has power to destroy the virus of hatred. And it may take a long time, he says. He says we must learn to negotiate the time interval between wish and fulfillment. He calls that patience. But love will have the final word, he thinks, in the universe.
I'm sitting here spellbound. Obviously, I could listen to you for hours, and I certainly want our listeners to come to understand the depth of your scholarship and your work, because I think we're going through this period of so much uncertainty. And it's really not uncertain because we've already experienced the anxiety of at the top of the government, what it means to receive messages and signals and deception and untruth over and over again, and how it weighs on our spirits, how it weighs on our humanity, why the truth that we understand and that we know is often questioned. And you write, as Dr. Thurman wrote, very clearly about how Howard Thurman had a unique connection to nature. That I remember Henry Louis Gates' documentary on the Black Church, and there you were saying, he talked to trees. He talked to trees. I found that particularly fascinating, and we are going to continue this conversation when we come forward. We are centering our spirits around the struggle that is in front of us, and there's no person in the country, from my perspective, who is more capable of helping us do that than Dr. Walter Fluker. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're coming back on the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show when we come forward.
The station you turn to when you've had it up to gear with cultural incompetence. KBLA Talk 1580.
My mother faced the same challenges that I had growing up. She was smoking, so I started smoking too. My mom got sick. Seeing her on a breathing machine, I had to open my eyes. Do I want to be another product of my environment or help change the world?
Keenan ended the cycle of nicotine addiction in his family. You can too. For free support, text Kick Nicotine to 66819 today.
Taxes was waiting around for your taxes to be done, which led to worrying about not getting any money back. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes in a day to get you up to $4,000 fast with a refund advance loan. Now this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Expert filing only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Refund advance has $0 loan fees and 0% APR. Refund advance loans may be issued by First Century Bank, N.A. or WebBank. Terms apply. Subject to approval.
Downy Rinse and Refresh. Break up with stinky clothes.
Rinse it out. Every now and then I get a little bit tired of the stinks that just will never come out. Oh, Downy in the rinse straight. Every now and then I rinse it out. One wash and it delivers. One wash, it smells so clean. Downy Rinse and Refresh, it's a dream.
Downy Rinse and Refresh. Fights odor in just one wash. Guaranteed.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Imagine a Los Angeles where everyone can thrive, where communities have access to the resources they need to succeed. That's the vision of Detours Mentoring Group, Inc. They're dedicated to improving life in LA County by providing educational support, employment assistance, and spaces for community engagement. By 2050, they want LA to be the best place to connect, create, learn, live, and play. They're working toward an education system that's well-resourced and culturally responsive, becoming a hub for artists and innovators, and making sure everyone has access to healthy food, quality healthcare, and safe housing. It's about building a future where we all have the chance to succeed. We invite you to learn more about their mission and get involved with Detours Mentoring Group, Inc. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Here they come, y'all. Here they come. Here they come, y'all. Here they come. Get out the way. Ooh. First things first with Dominique DePrima at 6 a.m. Tavis Smiley at 9 a.m. Truth Time with Dr. Cornell West and Nina Turner at 12 noon. Here they come, y'all. Here they come. Here they come, y'all. Here they come. Get out the way. Get out the way. Get out the way. The Jesse Jackson Jr. Show at 1 p.m. The D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show at 2 p.m. A More Perfect Union with Dr. Nee Quarterly Forte at 4 p.m. Here they come, y'all. Here they come. Here they come, y'all. Here they come. Get out the way. Get out the way. Get out the way. Tune in weekdays from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. for the talk of the town. Only on KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about. Here they come, y'all. Here they come.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate meets a scholarly match.
Hey.
Hi, I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome back to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My special guest is Dr. Walter Fluker. Dr. Fluker is the nation's foremost historian and authority on Howard Thurman. Dr. Fluker, I have two questions. One, Dr. Howard Thurman had a unique relationship with nature, with things that are natural. And he used nature as part of his theology to center himself. I would make the case that we probably are going to be hearing all kinds of political messages in this environment, but we're going to have to retreat to a centering space personally. in order to maintain some level of sanity during this period. And then I'd like your final thoughts on what would Howard Thurman have to say about a people whose backs are against the wall?
Jesse, to answer the first question, Thurman, from his earliest childhood, says that his closest companions were with nature. He would sit in his boat on the Halifax River, and there he learned the secret of solitude. Edgar Allan Poe had a great poem that I think captures what Thurman means by solitude. He says, from childhood's hour, I've never been as others were. I've never seen as others saw. I could never bring my passions from a common spring. To the same token, I've awakened at the same tone. All I've ever loved, I've loved alone. And for Thurman, it was important to allow quiet to find its way to you. And it's in the quiet, in the whispers of the quiet, that nature allows, Thurman felt, one discovers one's God and one's relationship with God. Not the only place, God is everywhere because God is in you, but nature becomes the magnificent temple where we can sit in contemplation and discover our God. This places him in the same tradition of his African ancestors, who understood the power of nature, the power of sitting with nature and conjuring new things in nature. What do we do for this time? I think that's what you asked me.
Yes, sir.
I'm writing a book, Jesse. I hope I have it done by the spring. It's entitled Wake Up Running. And I use Thurman and King and others because I think the great challenge for leadership in the 21st century is to wake up and become aware, not only of one's social, political context, but of the throbbing struggles within us. To not be afraid, to echo Thurman, to not ever, ever allow the other to make you hate and fear yourself and your people. We will not be able to get home unless we wake up and run to the other. And in running to the other, we'll find compassion, I think, that we thirst for in our own lives. Most importantly, in waking up running, I'm channeling, I think, not just Thurman, but a whole new generation of leaders, of new ambassadors who are in the wings. You just had Daniel Black's refrain on. They're coming. They're coming. And I say to those of us who are in existing leadership roles, positions, whether that's in the church, civil society, or elsewhere, let us receive those who are coming and find ways in which we sponsor a new generation of leaders who are spiritually disciplined, as in Thurman, intellectually astute, and morally anchored. We're going to need them because we got a run ahead of us. And it's not a short run. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon.
I have to remind our listeners that so much of Dr. Thurman's work is actually occurring during Jim Crow.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at shuffling blacks. We're looking at dancing and bowing and scraping African Americans because first Reconstruction had ended. And obviously that interaction with Gandhi and that interaction between Du Bois and Gandhi and Dr. King's work is really before Second Reconstruction, or if we measure that by Brown versus the Board of Education. So Thurman is offering to us a way to stand up, to fight oppression with a level of dignity that we did not have before. We don't have to kowtow. My son, Dr. Fluker, is watching me in the Trump era. My daughter is watching me in the Trump era. I want to give one other sample and a little example before, as we prepare to close the segment. On February 19th, 1929, W.E.B. Du Bois writes a letter to Mohandas Gandhi. And in that letter, and I'm going to summarize it, I am the editor of a small magazine known as The Crisis, which has a circulation of about 30,000 copies among educated American Negroes. I very much want a message from you to these 12 million people who are the grandchildren of slaves who are facing great difficulties going forward in America. Can you grant us this request? Gandhi writes him back and he says, "Dear friend, I was delighted to receive your letter with a footnote from Mr. Andrews. It is useless for me to even attempt to send you an article for your magazine. I therefore send you forthwith a little message from Mohandas Gandhi." He then writes a message: "Let not the 12 million Negroes be ashamed of the fact that they were grandchildren of slaves. There is no dishonor in being a slave. There is only dishonor in being a slave owner. But let us not think of honor or dishonor in connection with the past." Now, he's writing this letter in the middle of Jim Crow. Let us recall that there is within there would be truthful and more loving is who you should be. For as the old wise men have said, truth ever as it is, untruth never was. Love alone binds, and truth and love accrue only to the humble. W.B. Du Bois writes him back and says, "Listen, these 30,000 Black people are very educated people. I really want you to speak to their truth because they too are no longer in slavery. They're living essentially under the conditions of Jim Crow." It is in that context that Howard Thurman goes and meets with Mohandas Gandhi and a delegation. He never responds back to W.E.B. Du Bois, but he responds to Howard Thurman. What does he learn from Howard Thurman?
Life is filled with tricks and moves and gestures. When we least expect it, Jesse, we're elected. Thurman had no idea, perhaps, that letter even exchanged between Gandhi and Du Bois. He might have read it in The Crisis. But I'm just saying the God of life is not limited to Du Bois nor to Gandhi. But it's in the meeting with Gandhi that Gandhi says to Thurman and his incredible spouse, Sue Bailey Thurman, that he believed that the power, the message of nonviolent resistance would come to the world through the Afro-American. That was Gandhi's benediction with after a 2-hour meeting with Thurman and his delegation.
So W.B. Du Bois writing Gandhi did not elicit that.
No.
But his presence with Howard Thurman after a 2-hour meeting changes the script and flips Gandhi's thinking about the condition of the Negro in America.
Here's a personal reflection. This is Walter Earl Fluker's interpretation on the event. Again, I think Thurman had dug so deeply into the channels of his own life that he simply was moving in the flow that was established for him. And we document this entire pilgrimage to friendship. And for Thurman, he was reluctant to go at first, wanted nothing to do with white folks sending him as a missionary to India. He debated it, but lo and behold, he shows up one day before he's ready to leave India. Gandhi had not contacted him, Jesse, but there was a guy coming from a mailbox bringing a letter to Thurman from Gandhi, and Gandhi invited Thurman to his tent. We don't have to worry about our future if we can trust the one, as the old folks say in the church, who holds the future. Our challenge is to put ourselves in a place, in a space, I call it democratic space, not just spiritual space, where we're available to do the work. And that will require a deep, deep wrestling with our own truth and our daring, our freedom to love in spite of. I'll probably go out saying, got to find a way to love. I'm not telling you to bend to your oppressor. I'm telling you, you got to love the world as God so loved the world. And love itself will find a way to fight your battles.
I'm
I
so
wish I
particularly
could do.
honored.
I wish I could say that better.
I am so particularly honored that on my inaugural program and our national discussion for the length of this series, that Dr. Walter Fluker will be hopefully one of our regular contributors. We're going to need his spiritual energy and his strength from the life and legacy of Howard Thurman, as well as his own ministry, to help guide us through these very difficult periods. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. This is the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. When we come forward, we're going to keep it moving in the eyes of freedom and with the hope that we can make a difference.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.